Hi, Mr. Henry. Here's how my paper's doing. Let's start with my title. I changed it temporarily to a systematic review of measurement tools used in genome-wide association studies on nicotine dependence, as I felt that I might become heavily reliant on these different measures of nicotine dependence that I had outlined in my review of literature. Looking at my findings now, this does not seem like it will be the case, so I changed it back to my previous title of a systematic review of genome-wide association studies on nicotine dependence. As for my literature review, I made a few key updates last week. I removed the section on the International Classification of Diseases by the World Health Organization because this measure of nicotine dependence did not appear anywhere in my findings, thus rendering it irrelevant. I added some new sections in its place. First, I added a section under the measures category for a measure of nicotine dependence created by a group of researchers at the Minnesota Center for Twin Research called Hicks measure. This measure appeared in only one of my studies used in my systematic review, but for that reason it still needed to be defined and contextualized. Second, I added the measure of exhaled carbon monoxide to my section of the different measurements of nicotine dependence. Again, this measure only appeared in one of my 15 studies in my systematic review, but is still relevant to understanding my findings. I added sections to the beginning of my literature review underneath the genetics section, detailing how to interpret genome-wide association studies. I addressed how reference SNP identification tags are used in the National Center for Biotechnology Information's databases to identify groups or clusters of alleles, and how those identification tags are used in genome-wide association studies. I also explained the nomenclature for describing the location of a gene on a chromosome using cytogenetic maps. It's really simple. Finally, I explained the conventional threshold for genome-wide significance, which is a p-value less than 5 times 10 to the negative 8th, how researchers identified that threshold, and how it's used in genome-wide association studies. I also explained the benefits and problems associated with the use of this threshold. After updating my review of literature, I went back through the methodology section of my paper to ensure it was in the proper tense and contained all relevant information to my procedure. I have started writing the findings section of my paper, and I have about 800 words so far. Overall, my paper already has 5,000 words, so I need to cut down somewhere eventually. However, that still includes the words contained in tables, of which I have 3, and my references list. Do those count in the 5,000 word count? I also updated my citations and references list to meet APA 7th guidelines. Do you have any tips for switching from 6th to 7th guidelines? I saw the changes about if you have 3 or more authors, you can use the Latin et al. In the first in-text citation, and the removal of the word DOI in the references list before the actual DOI number. There's something about how the running head might change as well. Student papers don't need a running head. Does that apply to us? Or because it's a research paper, is it different? A few questions there. I just thought it would be a good idea to update it to the 7th edition, seeing as that's the most recent thing, and I have the time to go back and make those changes. It's been kind of tough last week to keep up with both the schoolwork and the research paper, especially as, some of my other teachers were figuring out how to make the online learning just work in general and setting up the schedules and what I needed to get done every day. I didn't always know ahead of time, so couldn't really plan out my day very well, but I did get quite a lot done. I went back through my findings and really finalized a lot of things, cleaned up my data, and started doing things to synthesize them, like using creating standardized ways to refer to the different phenotypes of nicotine dependence, like the different measures, and finding ways to standardize those so I could best synthesize my results. Also little things like using scientific e-notation for all of the p-values that I found, and also for some of my studies they didn't include the gene in which the allele was located, so I started going back through and trying to just manually type in the reference SNP number into a database and identifying the gene through there if I could. I still have a little bit of work to do there, but I've already made some pretty cool conclusions from my research, and it's looking really nice. In total, from those 15 studies in my systematic review, I have 1,061 lines of association data on those different tiers of significance that I was talking to you about in class the week before last. It's nice that the deadline is extended and we don't really have to worry about the presentation anymore, although I was getting pretty comfortable with making those whips, so at least I know that I can do a presentation of that length, hopefully. But I'm glad that I don't have to worry about that anymore, although it doesn't mean that this paper has to be really good. Overall, been a good week for online learning. I hope you're well. We are also keeping it safe for our house. That's about concludes it for my State of the Paper address. Bye.